Rochelle.
It's such a pleasure for me to be with you this afternoon. What Claire didn't mention is that I actually lived in the Maritimes in the Atlantic provinces for many years. I was based in Nova Scotia, and I would spend my vacations in New Brunswick. I really had this, coup de cœur. It was really a place I absolutely love, and I've been back many times. But with COVID, let's just say that it kind of kept me more often in Ottawa, but I really look forward to resuming traveling, and New Brunswick is going to be one of my first destinations.
Well, we'll make sure as soon as it opens up.
It's I've always been touched by the warmth and the friendliness of the people, so it's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm going to share my PowerPoint to make things a bit easier. Whoops, I have to do this first. So if all goes well, you should be seeing it.
Yep, yes.
Wonderful. And as was mentioned, I will have to leave a bit. We were set to be together till about 3, but I will have to leave at 2:45 this afternoon, unfortunately. So from coping to healing, making the transition. And I'm always fascinated. In French, we don't have much of a distinction. In English, you've got curing and healing. In French, we only have curing. And I love the English word healing because it really conveys a sense of wholeness, that you move from coping, just barely able to meeting all the challenges, to healing that's really imbued with the sense of, again, of wholeness and of well-being. And that's really what we want to explore together this afternoon. So we're going to look at some basic definitions. We're going to look at some physical strategies that are conducive to healing. There's a lot of research that's been done. In fact, even since the beginning of COVID, that indicates that if we make some slight changes in our lives, sometimes we create much better conditions for physical healing. We're going to look at some home-based and work-based strategies conducive to healing, how we can modify a few little things in our immediate environment in order to optimize the body's ability to heal. We're going to look at some cognitive strategies, the way we look at life. And one big factor in healing, and we're going to talk about that a bit more, is really managing our energy in such a way that we don't lose it in futile battles. So learning how to embrace what needs to be embraced without, getting really stuck in anger and a sense of injustice. But ultimately, with all that stuff, the goal is to offer really simple, easy to use tools that will be conducive to healing, well-being, and resilience in daily life. And because we're such a small group, what I want to say, if you want to ask questions as we go along or make comments, please free to jump in whenever you feel like it. So first, we need to define resilience, because healing and resilience are really connected. If I learn to embrace challenges and overcome challenges, it's really going to help me heal as well. And what's fascinating is that resilience is often defined as the capacity to resist adversity. That's the definition that we often see in papers and in the media. But that definition, in fact, is wrong. In real life, resilience is the capacity to bounce back in a timely manner. And we're talking about that yesterday. The ideal definition, in fact, it would be bouncing forward. And bouncing forward in psychology is called post-traumatic growth. How we use really difficult events in our lives to, in fact, grow more than what would have happened without the hardship. And so resilience, the people who show the greatest resilience are the people who really move into post-traumatic growth. And so it's really, again, looking at the challenges and learning from them and really honing all the skills through those experiences. And the definition really matters. If we stick with the first one, the message it conveys is that if something really tough happens in my life, I'm expected to just take it in and keep going. So be it a really tough diagnosis like cancer, be it hearing that I may be losing my job or whatever else, the first definition is all about, kind of stiffening up and then moving forward. That's not a good strategy. The good strategy, in fact, is to fully experience what happens. And it means often to be destabilized. When we get, again, the tough diagnoses, when we have really bad news, it's not true that we just stiffen up and keep going. We're really shaken, and sometimes shaken to the core. And that reaction is normal. And the definition matters. I just give an example from my work with the Canadian Armed Forces. Before deploying our military overseas, we used to train them with the first definition, telling them, guys, it's going to be really rough out there. But if you're resilient, you're going to be able to resist. And most unfortunately, we've deployed our men and women into circumstances where it was humanly impossible to resist. They saw atrocities. They were afraid for their lives. And in those situations, I mean, human beings just don't stiffen up. They are afraid, they are destabilized. And because they had been trained with the first definition, they thought they were abnormal when all the emotions came flooding over them. And they thought they had no resilience, while in fact, they were reacting absolutely normally. And if they had been told it was a normal reaction, they would have fared a whole lot better. They would have known it was normal, and they would have known that bouncing back or even bouncing forward was possible. We also have two modes of resilience, and we see those two modes in all circumstances when people feel threatened, when we feel there's a danger in our lives. The first mode is called survival resilience. And it means that if I feel that the image I could give you is that, I'm holding on to a rope, hanging over a cliff, and I'm holding on to my rope and I'm not going to let go. And I feel it slipping, but I keep holding and holding and holding, feeling that's what's going to save me. And the other form of resilience is well-being resilience. If I come back to survival resilience, it's a form of survival. Maybe another example would be, and I see a lot of it during COVID, people are flooded in the healthcare system with demands and work. And what they do, they just pile the stress on. So there was, for example, the first wave, the COVID wave. They experienced the stress. The second wave came by. They added the stress to the first one. The third wave came, yet more stress. And the fourth wave hit, same thing. So they just sit there and they take it in, like with the first definition. And it's now bringing them to a point of collapse. Well-being resilience is, in fact, stepping back and thinking, there are things I don't control. I'm now being overwhelmed with all kinds of stress. What can I change in my life that will allow me to fare better? Is there anything, any habits I can change in my life that would help me to be able to face up to all that stress? And so survival resilience is hanging on for dear life Well-being resilience is more reflexive, reflective, and more kind of a form of training. And this afternoon, we're going to look at well-being resilience. But I need to say that survival resilience is the natural reaction when we have bad news. We're just going to really, again, stiffen up, tighten up, and try to meet with what's coming our way. But it's not the best way to deal with it. And so it's totally normal to be thrown off balance by a diagnosis. And the best path is to acknowledge that, to say, yes, I'm now destabilized. I embrace the fact that I'm destabilized right now, but I know I can bounce back or forward. So there's something in the future that's positive. And to deal with all that, the anxiety that comes with those difficult situations, we need to distinguish between stress and anxiety, because often we confuse all this. Stress, in fact, is our physical reaction to a real or perceived threat. Someone cuts me off on the highway and nearly sends me into the ditch. My heart will pound and my muscles will tense up. That's stress. That's the physical reaction. Anxiety is what happens in my mind. So, for example, if I go back to the same highway and I'm thinking, is someone going to cut me off today? And I anticipate something difficult, and it floods me with stress hormones. It's as if I reenact in my mind all the difficult scenarios, and these scenarios in turn will trigger stress hormones that will affect my body. So the body and the mind work together to maintain the unpleasantness and the fear. And so we're going to try to see how we can diffuse some of that. Given the facts that the stress is the physical reaction and anxiety is more in my mind, we can ask the question, where can we act to be able to control this beast of anxiety? First, we can act at the physical level. I can create conditions that will really calm my body so that when something stressful comes on the horizon, my body is much calmer and much more capable to absorb it. So my first strategies will have to do with my body. The second strategy will have to do with decreasing the intensity and the number of stressors. In other words, I will look at my environment. Is there anything in my life that I could change or eliminate that will help me keep my energy for healing? What we want to do is not to waste precious energy dealing with stressors that are not worth it. And the image I often use is like a hot water tank. Let's say you've got a hot water tank, but it's filled with holes. So it's got leaks here and there. Sometimes not big leaks, just a drop here and a drop there. But when you add them up, you end up with losing a lot of your hot water. It's the same with our energy. If I keep in my life a whole bunch of stressful situations that are not necessary, and I keep them because, well, they're just small and I feel it's no big deal, if I've got many of them, they will still drain me of my energy. And when we talk about healing, energy conservation is key. So we're going to look at what happens in the environment, what we can have a hold on to. And the third strategy will be to look, how can I work on my mind? How can I prevent my mind from going off on a tangent and amplifying everything and literally conditioning me with fear and anxiety? So these are the three areas where I can act. So the first one we're going to start with is the physical environment. And there are 8 strategies. I'm not going to read them all, but we're going to look at what we can do physically to conserve our energy for healing. If you were to choose one strategy that's really conducive to healing, it's protecting your sleep. It's the one that comes at the very top of the list. And I'll tell you why. It's because we've discovered, and it's not that long ago, only about 4 years ago, we've discovered that our brain has what I could call a cleaning system or a cleaning crew that gets activated only when we sleep well. If we don't sleep well, the lymphatic system, this cleaning system for the brain, just doesn't kick in. And if the system doesn't kick in, it really hinders hugely the ability of the body to heal. And I don't have time to get into all the details, but there's a researcher called Matthew Walker who looked at the connection between poor sleep and healing in cancer patients. And he really demonstrated to what extent protecting one's sleep is crucial. So how do we do that? What's the best sleep hygiene? First of all, sleep about 8 hours per night. Often people say, oh, that's a huge lot. It is a lot of time, but again, I don't have time to get into the details, but when you look at a normal night, we've got 5 cycles of 90 minutes, and we need the whole sequence for that cleaning system to really be working at its peak. So 8 hours per night is really the starting point. You can drop below 7 and still be relatively okay. If you drop below 6.5 hours of sleep per night, you're smack within the danger zone. And that means, for example, your risk of developing Alzheimer's will be multiplied by 5. And so protecting your sleep, your 8 hours, is really key. And you can sleep more if you want to. That's perfectly fine. It's sleeping less that's a problem. Keep your room dark and cool. Most people sleep at around 21, 22 degrees. And we know that it's going to interfere with that cleaning system in the brain. I went to a conference when the researcher compared it to a room filled with computers, the brain being a room filled with computers. It needs to be cooled once in a while to work well. So sleeping in a cool room will be necessary. To really optimize sleep, we also have to get up always at the same time. We cannot have a weekday schedule and a weekend schedule, because our body takes up to 3 days to readapt, even when we change our sleep schedule by 1 hour. So if I keep changing my sleep schedule, my body just doesn't know where it is. And again, the cleaning system will have difficulty activating. We shouldn't watch any screen an hour before bedtime, and it includes the cell phone, the computer, the TV, and even the e-reader. A lot of manufacturers say, oh no, it's not an issue, it's not a problem anymore. We've reduced the intensity of the light in our e-readers. They have, but the problem, what really inhibits our sleep hormones is when we look into a source of light. And when you read your ebook, you're looking straight into the light. If you read a regular book, the light is reflected on the page and back in your face. And that process eliminates a lot of wavelengths that interfere with the sleep hormones. So at bedtime, no screen whatsoever. And at bedtime, we shouldn't even look into any kind of light because again, it's looking into the light that's detrimental to sleep. And so we should dim all lights a few hours before bed. We should eliminate all the LEDs from our bedrooms and bathrooms because the LEDs inhibit about 50% more of the sleep hormones. So to be avoided, we should monitor closely coffee and alcohol. We forget that coffee's got a half-life of 7 hours. And what that means is that if I really have a good cup of coffee at 3 in the afternoon, at 10 at night, I will still have 50% of the caffeine in my bloodstream. So it takes, the body takes a long, long time to eliminate caffeine. So it's good to have a coffee in the morning, but we suggest nothing with caffeine after noon, especially if you're involved in a healing process. And alcohol, what it does, if you drink it too close to sleep time, it totally shuts down the cleaning system. So it really paralyzes the brain cleaning system. So if you want to drink alcohol, you could maybe have it at noon or late afternoon, but certainly not before bed. And another phenomenon that really controls, regulates sleep is morning light, even if it's overcast. Our brain is designed that it knows how to decode all the light messages year round. And if we expose ourselves to morning light any day of the year, the brain will know, oh, this is morning light. And immediately it starts triggering a hormone that will be essential to help us fall asleep at night. So even if it's just stepping out your back door for 2 minutes with your cup of coffee in the morning, just exposing your face to morning light will have quite an impact on the quality of your sleep. And if you have insomnia problems, you can do something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And you've got lots of different websites that offer it for free. So you just enter CBT for insomnia in the, on the search engine, and you will have the choice amongst quite a few different packages. Physically, we also need to look at our sugar intake. What's been found, and it started in 2019, and there's been even more research since, if we eat sugar, and we don't need to eat that much. If we eat, let's say, more than what's found naturally in foods, like in fruits and in some dairy products, if we start eating a lot of refined sugar, what it does, it loosens what's called the blood-brain barrier. I could liken it to a fabric. It's as if we've got a mesh between the brain and the body. And that mesh normally is really tightly knit. And it's tightly knit to make sure that no toxic pathogens from the body, no viruses, no toxic chemicals penetrate into the skull and affect the brain. So the brain's got this wrapping that really protects it. What we found recently, if we eat sugar, a lot of sugar in our tea or coffee or lots of desserts, what happens, that fabric, that mesh becomes way looser and allows for all kind of junk to reach the brain. And it won't give you a full-blown meningitis or encephalitis, but it's going to put your brain into chronic inflammation. The brain is really fighting all that stuff coming up. And it will make you much more vulnerable to anxiety. and it will reduce also your healing capacity. And so cutting back on sugar is a really important strategy. And another one is to increase omega-3s in our nutrition. What we found, and it's really recent research, is that if, for example, I eat a lot of chia seeds and sardines and herring and salmon and all the foods rich in omega-3s, when I digest those foods, my body, in fact, captures all the omega-3s and keeps them quite specifically to strengthen the networks in the brain responsible for controlling anxiety. So it's as if my body just goes in, takes the omega-3s and patches up whatever would threaten the anxiety control in my brain. And so it's got a very specific impact on anxiety. And if you look on the web at the, often they tell you the daily intake of omega-3s, look at the norms and double them to make sure that you have that. And I see that I forgot to put on this slide another one. It's called tryptophan, and it's a substance that's needed to build a substance that controls anxiety. That substance is called serotonin, and serotonin is actually the substance that antidepressants act upon. But my body really has difficulty producing serotonin because it lacks one of the building blocks, and that building block is called tryptophan. And tryptophan is found in eggs, in dairy products, in bananas, in chocolate. But we need that on a daily basis to be able to make our own serotonin. Physically also, and I will add it, I make a note, I will add it to the slide so that you have the information. Also, research has taught us that when we experience anxiety, we need to exercise. We really need to get it out. And it's one of the best strategies. And people thought, well, does it mean I've got to jog 20 kilometers every day in order to be able to release my anxiety? And in fact, we've established that no, it's much more modest. It would be about 30 minutes of moderate cardio exercise 5 times per week. And so it just means that you find a window in your 5 windows in your week where you go for a brisk walk or you go cycling, but you can have stationary bike or rower, and it doesn't have to be flat out. You just need to increase your heart rate a little bit, and that's fine. And if you do that 5 times a week, it will really help you process anxiety. Something else that produces serotonin, that substance that really helps us feel calm, is to tidy up. So if you choose to wash dishes, to vacuum, to clean up the desktop, no matter what kind of tidying up you do, it will in turn trigger serotonin, and serotonin will calm you down. And I'm sure you've all experienced it. I mean, when the house is in chaos and you start cleaning, there is a sense of peace that gradually settles. That's the signal that serotonin is working. Something else that we need, that our brain needs, and it's really physical to control anxiety, is to try to maintain a familiar environment. Our brain doesn't like surprises at all. Our brain needs familiarity to feel safe and to keep its energy to control whatever anxiety may happen. And we all know it. If the whole of our life is suddenly changed, we won't be able to cope, even less to heal. If just one or two things are changed at a time, we're better able to absorb them. So what we need to do during a healing process is to make sure that we don't destabilize the brain too much and keep a very stable environment, keeping the same physical environment, keeping the same schedule, keeping the same connectedness with others, really trying to keep change at a minimum. And I wanted to show you why. In our brain, fairly deep in our brain, there's this structure here. It's called the cingulate cortex. And this piece of the brain, as you say, is just situated below the rest of it. And so the rest of our brain, a lot of what happens in us happens because of this, the outer layer. But this outer layer is highly influenced by this yellow structure, and the cingulate cortex wants stability. If you destabilize this structure, then it sends signals all over the brain that things are not right, and it really increases anxiety. So in times of healing, a stable environment is a good strategy. Something else that siphons off a lot of energy, one of those leaks in the water tank, is the fact that as human beings, we have the habit of postponing what we like least. For example, I get up in the morning and I know there are tasks I really don't like doing. So I will think, oh, I'll do them later. I'll do them later. That's a huge drain on our energy because our brain knows that these tasks need to be done, and they kind of hover over the horizon. And just knowing they're there really, again, drains some of our energy. So the best strategy is to swallow frogs, swallow those difficult tasks first thing in the morning. You want to have as nice and open horizon for your day as you can. So all that nasty stuff you try to process early in the morning. And when we look at the way most people deal with anxiety, and again, loads of research, have validated this unfortunate tendency, when stuff really stresses us, the most common reaction is to ignore it. Feel, if I don't look at it, if I turn a blind eye, if I act as if it's not there, it's going to go away. And so what we do, in fact, we just add stress behind what we could call an emotional dam. We all have an emotional dam. But if we ignore the stressors, they just pile up one after the other behind the dam. And I can tell you that for quite a while, things will go fine. We can hold on for a while, but sooner or later, there will be way too much behind the dam, and the dam is going to break down. And you don't want this to happen because this is catastrophic. So what you want to do is more to act like a river. Instead of piling up all those emotional stressors, you try to get rid of them as they present themselves. You keep an ongoing flow and you don't dam up all that stuff. And there's a researcher in the US, she specializes in regulating anxiety, and she's made some interesting discoveries. She's one of those researchers who highlighted the fact that we tend to dam up our anxiety. And she said, when we do that, what happens, the anxiety, even small stuff, it just adds up and adds up and adds up and adds up until it takes us into a critical zone where we're much more tensed and where we're in a state that really can jeopardize healing. Because when we get here, we're flooded with stress hormones. When we're here, not so much. And we know that stress hormones really hinder healing. So what she found is that if we pay attention, and as we feel the anxiety rising in us and we say, oops, I sense something, if we stop, pay attention, and deal with the anxiety right then, we can decrease it. And it's obvious that during the day, something else will come along that will trigger more stress and anxiety. But again, if we tackle it right then and there, we just bring it down and on and on and on. And so what happens is that I don't end up being totally rid of anxiety, but I maintain it within healthy boundaries. I maintain it within boundaries that will not affect my healing process. And so Apple really tried to see what helps. What are those pauses that allow us to control anxiety? She says that they help us process emotions as they arise. They're very short, from 30 seconds to about 3 minutes. They're all sensory by nature. They're all anchored in the body. And they trigger what's called a parasympathetic response. To sum it up, I mean, our nervous system has got like two big branches. One is the sympathetic nervous system, and it's the system that keeps me really on alert and vigilant and making sure I don't miss anything. And it will also fuel my need to fight if need be. The parasympathetic nervous system is the calming one, the one telling me time to chill, time to breathe in, time to center. And the pauses that Apple has identified all trigger that kind of response. And that's what we want, because we want to reduce stress hormones. And so I've used her work and work from other researchers, John Kabat-Zinn and others, to create this sensory inventory. And the way it works, and we've tested it now with quite a few big samples, you need to identify what relaxes you the most. For example, in terms of smell, can you think of the smells that make you relax? For me, I've got geranium and I've got lavender, and I keep them on my desk. And when I have something really stressful that happens to me, I just open my bottle and I have a whiff of my geranium or lavender. So already I give my body a signal to relax. In terms of touch, for me, I love merino wool. And I've got a small throw in merino wool that I keep. And when something tough happens, I wrap myself up in my merino throw. In terms of hearing, I love the sound of water or the birds or a piece of music, Eric Satie's first Gymnopédie. When I feel stressed, I put that on. And all this is cumulative, so I can wrap myself in wood, have a sniff of my lavender and put the music on. All of this, will just enhance, again, that relaxation response. In terms of sight, objects or pictures that help you calm down. On my desk, I've got this little hand, and it's just a hand that reminds me to pause, a very gentle reminder that, yeah, time to pause. So I keep it there. In terms of taste, I will keep a nice, herb tea and or minty tea or something that, again, makes me feel good. Breathing, we need to use something that it's called box breathing. And box breathing means that I inhale counting to 4, I hold my breath counting to 4, I exhale, counting to 7, 8, and I hold at the very end of the exhale for another 3 seconds. And what it does, the purpose really is to empty my lungs as much as possible. Because when I get at the end of the exhale, my body will trigger a relaxation response. So whatever form of breathing I'm going to do, I'm going to breathe out as much as I can. And stretching also triggers a relaxation response. If I stretch the large muscle chains, so if I do something like this, stretching all my shoulders and my back, immediately it sends to my brain a signal for relaxation. The parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And so I can stretch just like this, but one of the best stretches that's been tested is, if you have one of those noodles that we use to float in the pool, you take the largest one and you put it on the floor and you lie on the noodle being along your spine, and you just open your arms and you don't do a thing. You just let gravity do the work. And what you're going to feel is that within a few seconds, and you do it for about a minute, 2 minutes, you will feel that your shoulders suddenly are drawn back, that your rib cage opens up, that you breathe more deeply, and all that sends to the brain a deep signal of relaxation. And so all this takes seconds, sometimes minutes. But if you add these strategies one to one another, in the end, you have a package that allows you to stay within those limits, and it will prevent you from going into the danger zone. So we've looked at the body. Now let's look at the environment. What can I do in relation to the stressors around me? What we've learned too recently is that most people, we have an unfortunate tendency, we ruminate a lot and we sweat the small stuff. And it can, in fact, monopolize up to 80% of our mental reserves. And it's not stuff that matters, but we become kind of obsessed with it. I don't know, I think of myself, feeling, oh, geez, the neighbor parked into my driveway and shouldn't have, and I will mull over that. So we need to identify those small details that suck up energy and that don't mean much. And in psychology, these are referred to as microstress. And what we need to do is to alleviate or eradicate mini stressors that really siphon off energy. It could be habits loved ones have that grate on our nerves. It could be nebulous expectations. We don't know what's expected of us, and it makes us anxious. It could be poor communication problems. It could be many things. And I don't have time to go into this exercise this afternoon, but this is a tool to help identify where we have microstress in our lives and with whom. For example, I could be, if I look at poor communication or when others don't deliver, maybe I've got a colleague who never does what he's supposed to do, and it really has an impact on my job. Maybe it's a loved one. I'm tired of always being the one taking out the garbage. Why someone else in the household doesn't do it once in a while? We could look at people who spread a contagion of stress. Do I have people in my environment who are so negative, they bring me down? And I always feel, well, they've been there for a long time and I don't really want to rock the boat. But these are the leaks I was telling you about. So this tool is to help you identify those energy leaks in your life and decide which ones you really want to plug and which ones you'll keep leaking. But ultimately, it's a tool to help us better understand where we waste energy. And the last place where we can really control our anxiety, again, is with our mind. What can we do with our mind? And the very first thing we have to be aware of is something called the negativity bias. The negativity bias is a normal human reaction. It's a mechanism that we have in the brain. All humans come equipped with this. And it was very useful during human evolution because it is the brain reaction that allows us to perceive threats and to react to them. So my brain is very vigilant in terms of what could cause me harm. And it's a good thing, but over the millennia of evolution, this specific mechanism has become amplified. It's become way too strong for our own good. So how does it work? If something really small happens in my environment, I may still perceive it as a threat. I give an example. If someone tells me that the dress I'm wearing today doesn't really suit me, my brain's going to latch onto that. Someone criticized me. It's not vital. I mean, even if the dress isn't nice, it's nothing vital. But my brain is designed to latch onto it. Someone criticized me, there's a threat. And when that happens, it means that my brain is so busy focusing on the threat, it becomes incapable of processing new information. So let's say if someone really criticizes me, it will be very difficult for me to carry a normal conversation because my mind would always tend to go back to the criticism. And that phenomenon is really strong. For example, if someone tells me I have a nice dress, I will experience a certain level of satisfaction. If someone tells me that the color doesn't suit me, the criticism I will receive with an intensity 5 times higher than the positive comment. So anything negative is amplified, and it's a normal part of the brain. But we have to be aware of it. We have to be aware that the brain does that. And it's good to become a really voluntary reaction to feel, when we react to small comments, feel, okay, it's my negativity bias. I'm now amplifying maybe by a factor 5. Let's bring back things into perspective. And the best way to do it is often to think, if someone else were in my shoes right now, and if I knew of the intensity of the reaction, what would I think about them? Would I feel, well, I think you exaggerate a bit? We need to counter the negativity bias. We need to develop an external witness, kind of a friend who tells us, cool it, now you're really in the throes of the negativity bias. Things are distorted. Take time to step back and recenter. And another way to deal with criticisms or frustrations is to dilute them through time. And I give an example. Last week, I was giving a talk to several hundred physicians, and the system crashed. The internet just called it quits. I was in sheer panic, thinking, this can't be happening. So there was a lot of anxiety, but pretty soon, so I was in that state, I would say, for about 3 to 5 minutes, really panicking. And then I used this strategy, asking myself, how are you going to feel about it next week? I can tell you this week, it doesn't trigger any anxiety in me. Next month, there will be nothing. In 2 years' time, same thing, nothing. It was a situation on which I had no control. It happened. It didn't put anyone into deep jeopardy. So in the end, it was no big deal. But in order to get to that conclusion, I needed to think, what are the consequences? What's going to happen in the future? And when we use that filter of time, we managed to diffuse, again, a lot of situations that would steal, that would rob us of our energy. Another strategy that's hugely beneficial for our healing is compassion. And that has been studied inside out, especially over the past 2 years. We now know that if we choose to create compassionate environments, if we choose to be in a compassionate environment, if we choose to create compassionate environments, it's going to have a very significant impact on our physical well-being and healing. For example, if someone shows compassion to me, almost immediately, my healing time will decrease. My body starts to heal faster. My pain will decrease by 50% just because someone is kind, considerate, compassionate with me. In terms of immunity, some immunity factors will double. So suddenly I'm much better equipped against infections just because I bask in a compassionate environment. And compassion is as impactful as antidepressants in light to moderate cases. If I choose to give compassion around me, my love hormone, my happiness hormone will rise suddenly. The stress hormones will decrease quite significantly, and again, creating conditions much more conducive to healing. My blood pressure will decrease. My inflammation will be reduced. So if I have asthma or arthritis, suddenly my symptoms will be lessened and my mood will improve and stabilize. And compassion, choosing to be compassionate, accepting other people's compassion, kindness, is the best protective factor we have so far in our toolbox in terms of psychological well-being and conditions conducive to healing. And it's a little bit like, I want to explain a bit how it works and how we make those choices. When we're faced with suffering, ours or that of others, often the first reaction, especially if it's for others, will be more cognitive. I will look at the situation. Let's say someone tells me they've lost their mother. I will immediately think, oh, they must feel sad. Their schedule must be all upside down. So I can put myself in their shoes, but more at a cognitive level. And that's quite normal. But then I will feel empathy. I will feel, oh, I can relate to the pain they're experiencing. And that's all fine and nice. We need to experience empathy. But we have to make sure that both when it's about our suffering and the suffering of others, we shouldn't stay stuck in empathy, because if we do, we end up in something called empathic distress. In the olden days, it was called compassion fatigue. It means that I keep resonating with my suffering. All that fills my mind is either my suffering or the suffering I'm witnessing. And if I stay in that resonance, it will bring me down. And because people fear often to end up in empathic distress, they feel, okay, I'm going to shut down all emotions, so I'm going to be safe. And they go into emotional shutdown when they're in pain, when they suffer, or when they see others suffering. The problem is when we choose to be, stiff upper lip and stoic, we try to inhibit a natural reaction, which is empathy. And if I try to inhibit my natural empathy for others or for myself, it's so difficult, it so goes against my nature that it's going to exhaust me. So both with empathic distress, if I say in the resonance of suffering, or if I try to shut down, both pathways will lead to my demise. There's one path that will work, and it's compassion and self-compassion. And all of this is always triggered by a very simple question: what kind of comfort can I offer right now? And it could be to others, but it could be to myself as well. And so cultivating self-compassion is going to be a key component in healing. And how do I do that? Well, self-compassion is about treating yourself with kindness the way you would do for a close friend. And what we know is that it's something very difficult to do. In general, we tend to judge ourselves way more harshly than we judge others. And so when we're in a situation when things are difficult, our first reaction should be, if it were the person I love most in this situation I'm experiencing, if they were in my shoes, what would I wish for them? What would I suggest to them? And once I've answered those two questions, I apply my answers to myself. And self-compassion's got three subcomponents. It's self-kindness. What kind of, small pleasures can I give myself on a daily basis? Taking time to really sip a good cup of coffee in the morning, taking time to go for a short walk at lunch and see a bit of sunshine, listening to music I like, whatever it is, really trying to embed small moments of simple pleasures in daily life. Then really focus on our common humanity rather than feeling isolated. For example, if I choose to isolate myself because I ache, because I suffer, and I feel, well, people wouldn't understand, a self-compassionate gesture would be instead to feel my suffering is not something that sets me apart from the human race. My suffering is, in fact, a common feature I share with the human race. And at that point, instead of isolating, I will try to reach out to people who would understand my suffering and with whom I could exchange, where I would feel accepted and embraced. And the third self-compassion subcomponent is mindfulness versus over-identification. And I take an example from working with cancer survivors, often right after surgery or treatment. I've heard so many of them say, I feel so bad. I cannot clean up the house the way I used to, or, I can't cook the way I'm supposed to, or I'm not available to my kids the way I was. And all their focus is on the shortcomings instead of saying, okay, my situation now makes it so that I have less energy, but let's look at everything I accomplish with that energy. And it could be, okay, I didn't cook, a 4-course meal, but the omelet I made was darn good. Or think, yeah, I couldn't go out and join a group for some activity, but hey, I connected by phone with a friend, and that felt really good. And again, because of the negativity bias, we're going to over-identify with what we cannot do, what hasn't been done. And we need to turn the tables and say, hold it, let's list what I have done and celebrate all that's good and positive that we bring into the world. And a strategy that we know doesn't lead anywhere is blaming others, blaming life, blaming injustice. That doesn't help. Again, that's in fact quite of a major leak in the hot water tank. And because if we add to suffering all the, I could say we need energy to deal with difficult situations. And if we add to it another layer where we're rebelling against it and we use a lot of the energy to decry injustice, it leaves less for the healing process. And so it's important to learn to replace spontaneous questions that arise, like, why me? Why am I sick? Why me? Why not folks who don't help themselves or never took care of themselves? Why now in my life? Those questions are useless. They're sterile. They don't lead anywhere. And we need to replace them with questions of self-compassion. And so when we don't feel so hot, the first question would be to stop and say, okay, what's happening right now? What am I experiencing? What are the events that make me feel uncomfortable? Then it's, what do I feel? Am I feeling sadness or anger or disappointment? What is at the core, what's that emotion in me? And then the question, what do I need? With what's happening with the emotion I have within me, what would I need to feel better? And my fourth question, who can meet my need? Is it me? Is it someone else? Is it both? Do I have to do something and someone else will continue to help me? But it's a reflex that we need. It's a self-compassionate reflex that we need to develop, that when we don't feel really comfortable, instead of just shoving everything behind the dam, to stop and ask and care for ourselves, making sure that we give ourselves what we need when we need it. And there's another researcher, also from California, who's been studying the emotions conducive to resilience and healing. And he came up with what he calls the winning triad: gratitude, compassion, and awe. And he says that we don't need lengthy experiences to reset ourselves. And what he's established is that if we pause for a few seconds to experience one of those three emotions, again, we change what happens in the body. Suddenly, the stress hormones will decrease and the body becomes an environment that will be more conducive to healing. So just very short experiences, watching a sunset for 30 seconds, listening to music you like for 30 seconds, enjoying a food and feeling grateful for that food for a few seconds, being nice to someone very briefly, just even opening the door for someone who's coming in, putting a hand on the shoulder, just brief moments, but they reset the body. And if we do that often, it will prevent us from sliding into anxiety and negativity. It will still happen, but not as often and not as deep. And what other researchers have established is that these are not traits, they are skills that we can cultivate. And that if we do it, it's going to take about 3 months to integrate that triad in our lives, to feel, is there something I could be grateful for right now? And in fact, that whole exercise is about keeping 3 questions in mind. What makes me grateful these days? What kind of comfort, of well-being can I offer others and myself right now? What makes feel awe, and how can I connect with it more often? And we know that the sources of awe are multiple. It could be nature. It could be people we admire. It could be a collective project. And it could be something mystical, more of a religious experience. But so life is generous. It offers us 4 sources of awe. And it means that we can reconnect with it on a regular basis. And I just share with you a ritual I've adopted in my life. At the end of my day, I light a candle and I ask myself those 3 questions. And I keep a journal. It doesn't have to be very long, but I ask myself, what can I be grateful for? What kind of goodness did I bring in the world today? And what did I get in terms of goodness? What really inspired awe in me? What did I see that was beautiful and moving? And it's about only half a page in my journal at night, nothing long. But when I go to bed, I know that I've managed to reset my body in a way that's going to be really conducive to healing. And just to end, we've covered a lot of tools today, all kinds of different strategies. And often we feel overwhelmed and it's difficult to know where to start. And so I offer you a last tool called micro-resolutions. And micro-resolutions are all about making very small changes in our life, very small successes on which we're going to build and which in the end will bring us much greater well-being and resilience. And usually our resolutions fail because they're way too vast and way too big. If I tell myself I want to be better organized, it's not practical. It's not down to earth. So I really need to break down such a big goal into small steps. And when we do that, suddenly it's much easier for the brain because the brain can focus on very specific, well-defined tasks. And gradually we change. And so let's look at possible micro-resolutions. It's got to be easy, literally a no-brainer. So with the material we saw, it could be, I will eat less sugar. So it could be, well, from now on, 3 days a week, I cut back 2 teaspoons in my cup of coffee. I do it 3 days a week, and gradually maybe I will spread it to the rest of the week. It could be, now I'm not going to look at any screens an hour before going to bed. It's a micro resolution. Now I'm going to light a candle and reflect on my day. As you see, very small stuff. It's explicit, it's measurable. It pays up upfront. I get some gratification. It's personal. No one could tell me where I need to start. I have to define that. It has to resonate positively to feel, well, if I do that, I will feel better. I will feel energized and not approach it as a chore. It's got to fire on cue. For example, if you don't want to look at screens in the bedroom, you make sure that no screens come in the bedroom. When you pass the bedroom threshold, you leave all the technology on the table by the door. And we usually make one, maybe two micro resolutions at a time, and we build on them bit by bit. And so I invite you to ask yourself the question, what micro resolution could you choose today to promote healing? And an image is worth 1,000 words. And I want to share this image that's often used for resilience and well-being. If I inflate a balloon the first time, it's going to be hard. I will really have to blow quite hard in it. But if I do it often with the same balloon, the balloon will become much more flexible, I mean, stretchy. And in the end, it's going to be quite easy to inflate my balloon. It's the same with the strategies we've looked at. Initially, it requires some effort. The more we do it, the easier it becomes. But we also have to acknowledge that the more we work towards healing, the more we move on. We gain skills, but we also change. We will never be the way we were before. Like the balloon that's gone through being inflated will never look the same ever again. And it's the same for human beings. The difficult moments we meet, the hardship we meet, all of this really changes us profoundly. And the people who heal best are the people who don't try to go back to what was, to long for life to be as before. An example I share as an occupational therapist, I've worked with cancer survivors. I've worked with people who had had mastectomies, people who had had hysterectomies, people who had had limbs amputated. And the people who didn't heal well were those who were always saying, well, I want my leg back. It's not possible. I would love my life to be the way before my leg got amputated. It won't work. If you dream of that, you dream yourself into sadness and discouragement. The people who have really healed well are the people who said, well, I've got a prosthetic leg, so be it, I'm going to make the most of it. And so they know that just hoping for some better previous time is again totally futile. They embrace what is and they move forward with it. And so on that note, thank you.